that policy makers can implement some changes.
Is that online?
Pardon?
Is that online?
It isn't yet. We just recorded it on the weekend, and we're hoping to put it up in the next little while. Yeah, I'll let her know. She'll be very We'll probably put it up at www.livingwagehamilton.ca. She actually hasn't seen it yet. so you're definitely the first person to see this. We're going to be telling similar stories about different perspectives of poverty. We have individuals from our urban Aboriginal community. We have individuals who are on social assistance, recent immigrants, youth, and we're hoping by telling these stories, by developing these narratives, we will be able to change minds and hope to bring more people on board our local living wage campaign. So I'll certainly share the link once it's up on the website.
Where are you going to show? What are you going to use to give these stories to?
Actually, for the Speakers Bureau, we've already been getting a number of requests, but it could be anywhere from churches to temples, mosques, schools, service clubs, perhaps business audiences as well. So we're putting it out there in the community that we have the Speakers Bureau available to come out and talk. And anybody who's interested in hearing them, the speakers themselves will receive an honorarium either from the organization they're speaking at or from a fund we've established, and so they'll be compensated for their time and energy in developing their speech. But we think it's going to be a really important tool, I think, for breaking down those stereotypes and changing things.
Where did you find the books that?
We basically put out a public call in the community. So we announced we're developing the Speakers Bureau and put in our local paper and other media sources that we're looking for interested individuals to send us a letter or give us a phone call letting us know that they are interested in participating. We had a huge originally we were hoping to maybe get 8 or 10 folks signed up. We had a huge response. And we ended up signing up 25 folks for the training, and it's been absolutely incredible. We've had great community support from people who've been helping doing the training, and there's lots of interest in the community in engaging these folks. Up next, I would very much like to introduce my good friend Trish Hennessy. Trish is, of course, Executive Director of CCPA Ontario. Trish has been doing exemplary work on the issue of living wage, but particularly on income inequality and really changing conversations, not just here in Ontario, but nationally as well, on the need to look more deeply at income inequality in our society. She is a renowned speaker that she has more requests than I think she can handle right now, but we're very pleased that she was able to find time this afternoon to be here with us. Personally, Trish, I'd just like to thank you for your leadership on pushing the living wage conversation forward, and certainly thank you for all your support over the last few years on this and other issues. So I'd like to bring up Trish Hennessy to talk about a very special topic.
Oh, thanks for that kind welcome, Tom, and thank you for the leadership that you've been providing in Ontario on this file as well. I've learned a lot from the work that Tom and the Hamilton Poverty Reduction Roundtable has been doing over the years. In many ways, they were path makers in Ontario on this file. So I'm here today. I'm happy to be here. At first, a couple of months ago, I told Donna Jean I couldn't make it. And I went through this spate of saying no to about 1,000 people, just trying to, you get to that point where you're not spending enough time, reading and writing and, doing research. So I stepped back for a bit. And then I looked at my week and I realized, hey, this is actually a pretty good week and I want to join you all. So it's good to be here. And what I want to do today is share with you, kind of like the world premiere launch of Tom's video that he just showed, the world premiere launch, the CCPA Ontario's Working for a Living website. And so this website is an idea that we hatched shortly after, about a year and a half ago. We hosted a full day session on the living wage in Toronto, and we had people come from across the province to participate in a discussion about what a living wage might look like in Ontario, to learn more from what work had been underway in BC from our BC counterparts, and over the course of the past few years, we've had CCPA economists help groups across Ontario who want to actually calculate a living wage, to help them figure out how to do that, to help them convene a conversation in their community about what it really takes to identify what a living wage would be. So we have that, and we're always happy to provide that support and that service to communities. But one thing that I was noticing, and I think that you touched a little bit about on this morning, was that sometimes the conversation about the living wage would start and end with the number. Oh, a living wage is X amount, it's that much? Wow, businesses can't afford it. And it's that same kind of a very frustrating frame that we've been stuck in with the minimum wage, that every time a province goes to raise a minimum wage, the conversation gets framed by what are businesses willing to pay. And so we found that the living wage offered an opportunity to help change the conversation, and to start talking about what it really takes to make a living. If you're working for a living, what does it take to make a living? And so we wanted to have an interactive project that did more than crunch a number. And so what we did was, last summer, our project coordinator, Cheryl Athasich, and I worked with a student from Ryerson University's multimedia program, and she specialized in audio. So she's just a high-level person who can do high-level audio interviews. And she came to us with an idea of pairing audio interviews with pictures, with fantastic photography, and making it interactive. So we engaged the student, Ellie, and then we partnered her up with a longtime friend of mine, professional photographer Neil Ward, and we sent them to several communities across Ontario. If we had more money, we would have gone to all of your communities, but we went to some of your communities, and some of you in this room are actually a part of this storytelling project. The project really is centered around interviewing 30 people and capturing 30 one-minute sound bites. And it's an interactive website. And the other fun part of this project for me personally is, this is my partner, Craig Pickthorne. And those of you who are in Ontario and often come to events where I'm speaking know Craig, because he's the first one to roll in and he sets me up technologically. Because technologically, I'm not there. So he'll come, he'll set me up, and then he'll leave. Sometimes he'll stand at the back of the room and people will go, "Are you a security guard?" And he'll say, "Yeah." But one of the many skills that Craig has is he's just really good technologically. And so what he did was he helped me bring to life the idea of a dedicated web page that's interactive. So Craig comes not from the back of the room, the side of the room here, to walk you through our new Working for a Living Wage website.
Thank you. Well, yeah, this is all very new for me. Usually I'm in the back. It's actually very exciting too. It's been going on, I guess, Cheryl, for 6 months now. Very close to public release, so exciting on many levels. We made a little sizzle reel that will hopefully make the rounds on social media. We'll watch that now. So very short.
The living wage is a perfect complement to any campaign to raise the minimum wage. The choice they face is either pay the rent or buy the food. We need to address poverty at its root cause, and part of that root cause is racism.
So a living wage is one where people can live with justice and dignity. The current minimum wage is utterly inadequate to support any kind of meaningful lifestyle.
How is it just that somebody at the bottom doesn't get an increase in pay and everybody else does? When should somebody at the minimum wage get a pay increase? Never?
One of the conversations we hope the Living Wage Project stimulates, how does our society actually generate stable, full-time employment?
So with any luck, that gets shared widely and will hopefully drive traffic towards the website.
That's called our teaser video.
So what I'm going to do now is just going to show you briefly the website. Connection is a little slow, but I'm sure you'll humor me.
They've been doing that all morning.
Awesome. So here we have the front page of the website, and there's the sizzle reel embedded right in there. The Facebook and Twitter links for that, so that makes it easy to share. As you scroll down after reading the short introduction, you'll see that photos slide in here. And one thing I want to point out is that we wanted a very unencumbered visual sensibility to the website. So you'll notice there's no titles or positions of any kind. I think the idea is to entice you to maybe click on some familiar faces and maybe some faces that you don't recognize quite yet. So I'm just going to go click on, this is Dave, he's from Hamilton. So what happens when you click on one of the photos, what's called a spotlight comes up and it darkens the rest of the web page. In a few moments, his name and position will slide in there. Also what happens is we provide, you'll see here, further reading, and these are specific to one of the 30 people that were interviewed. So depending on what they do or what they've said in their segment, this will be pertinent to that.
Further reading, I can't read it from back there.
Oh, okay, so this one is Hamilton's unemployment rate hides struggles of working poor. If you click on it, it's a link. Now, I'm doing this offline, but if you were online, that would, I think it's a CCPA Ontario news story. Anyways, so we have little play button at the bottom.
The current minimum wages, and it's been that way for my entire working life, are utterly inadequate to support any kind of meaningful lifestyle.
So he'll play, most of them are in around a minute or so. And actually, this is one of my favorites. So I won't play it all the way through because I know we have to keep going. Also over here, you'll see each individual segment is individually shareable, which is to say, if you want to share, you don't have to share the entire website. You have maybe someone from your community, maybe I think Tom is in there. So if you're from Hamilton, you'll share Tom, and that will share. Not share this. Okay, so there you go. That'll give you the familiar share interface for Facebook, and that's how it will appear on your timeline. Same with tweets. Everyone's familiar with that, I guess. There's 30 of those. I don't even have a Twitter account. I just make the content. Everyone else can go out and we need you. So that's pretty much it. You slide down this tall, very tall web page. There's 30 segments, like I said. What else am I? Oh, just a brief about the working about the web page, working for a living and a living wage. A bit more information there. There's a link to some resources for the CCPA Ontario office, and then just a listing of all the 30 contributors to the project. I think that's the main bits of the website, unless I'm missing something.
No, so yeah, 30 ways, 30 arguments for a living wage or a minimum wage that pays a living wage. And coming at it from every perspective that we could think of, from an economic or business perspective to a person trying to actually get by earning a minimum wage that isn't paying a living wage. So we hope that it's the kind of site that people feel is engaging enough visually to spend some time really learning about it and listening to storytelling and soundbites in a different way than we normally do. And And so our request of you is that when we release this, and we'll be doing so in the next couple of weeks, if you could help amplify the message by sharing, you can share the entire page, as Craig just said, or you can pick and choose people from your own community if you see them in here, or
I'm going to share this one, I think.
or I hate that picture, by the way, but it's okay. It was a sweltering hot summer day that day, and I was like flushed, but it's the picture that we have. Anyway, so you can pick and choose, and somebody might have an aspect of the argument that you particularly like. So it's meant to that you can curate the experience yourself in terms of what you want to share. So that's it. Our Working for a Living project. Yes.
Is it possible if we were to do that, say, element, that we could populate this with some of our stories?
If I can get a funder, yes. We just spent all our money getting this much. So to be able to add more, then I need to pay someone to be able to do the interviews, the photography, and the technical stuff. So if there are enough people who actually want this sort of thing to happen, I'm always happy to put together a proposal and go to a funder, especially if it's just there's demand out there for this sort of product.
Or if someone came to you with funding, could you? Those are magic words.
Please come to us with funding. So yeah, I mean, we would love it if this was just the beginning, if we were just planting one seed, and that we could plant several seeds and multiple flowers grow throughout Canada.
How much did you spend to get to that?
Oh, I could tell you the number, but then it actually wouldn't reflect how Craig subsidized this person by giving so much of his time away.
Do we have permission to use that's in our own living wage sort of website?
I hope you do.
Embedded in our own site.
I hope you do, and that was one of the things that we thought. So for instance, we have a couple of Waterloo people on this, and beside each person, the link for further reading, we actually made a link that takes you to a Waterloo site to help. So we wanted this to be sort of an interactive. This isn't just about staying on the CCPA site. This is about, did you like what this person from Waterloo said? You might actually want to read more about, what Greg DeBrutti wrote about a blog on this one. And so we're trying to get that sort of interactive thing. And that's the future for communications for all of it, for those of us who are promoting social justice. If we can share and amplify each other's work, then I think it just makes for a richer communications experience.
I think we have one in the back.
Yes.
Is there a call to action on this section of the website?
No. We're really just trying to spark storytelling. We actually link to many sites where there are calls to action, local calls to action. But here's the qualifier. The Canadian Centre for Policy Alternatives is a charitable status organization. So we don't do advocacy. We do education. That's what we're mandated to educate. So that's our focus. Call to action, read it and share it. Yes.
I wonder if I'm going to this website and I'm interested in one aspect of the living wage campaign, how would I find that out without going through all the work?
That's actually a good point, and I was thinking about this earlier, but when I have this page here about the living wage project, maybe instead of just the name and title, like what they actually talk about, would that be useful? Keyword, yeah.
Excellent.
I'm just gonna make a mental note of that, so I don't have a pen.
You will remember, but that's great. That's great feedback to get.
We tweeted to you, but
that's a black hole right there. But I have to say, I mean, being Hennessy's roadie for the last couple of years, I know way more than I ever thought I would about like migrant worker issues and childcare and all these kind of issues. But this is, I think, my favorite, and I think it's been the most enthralling to be involved with. So I'm thankful, and it's an honor to be here in front of all you fine people.
Thank you. Thank you.
This is great. I think we'll all be on board. So if you let us know a couple days ahead of the release of that, we can mobilize.
Nice.
Thank you.
So Adam is going to come up, and Adam and Trish are going to wing a conversation on the intersection between the minimum wage and the living wage. And most of you know that Adam is the director of Pathway to Potential, the Poverty Roundtable in Windsor, Essex. And Adam has also spent the better part of the last year on the Ontario Minimum Wage Advisory Panel.
Who said better?
Pardon?
Who said it was better?
Doesn't qualify the experience. It's just referring to the timeline. So they have lots to share on this topic that we have frequent conversations in the community of practice about. So take it away.
So I guess we should let them in on a little secret that like this wasn't planned.
Totally impromptu. Inside
Sorry.
the actor's studio.
I just had a question about the projects that came through our streaming. Wondering if you have anyone with a rural perspective featured on the site.
We do, yeah, I think we do have someone from, did Betsy have the picture? We did go to John Kent.
The maybe one.
Yeah.
I can't remember.
Yeah.
I know one person.
We did our best. Yeah. You know, the CCPA doesn't have a whole lot of money, so we stretched this out a lot in terms of what it costs to go to different communities and engage a professional photographer and a full-time student for a summer. I think this one. Okay.
Okay.
Are we talking about minimum wage or living wage?
Both. Both. It's the intersection, I think. Do you want to start?
So do you get a lot of people who are confused about the difference between minimum wage and living wage?
A surprising amount of confusion, and that really struck me when I was starting my work with the minimum wage advisory panel. I realized that there was a tremendous amount of confusion about the difference between a living wage and a minimum wage, and people would even talk about those interchangeably. So I realized that there had to be a lot of education being done. Now, mind you, we had not launched a living wage campaign in my community in Windsor, Essex, so that could have been part of it. We hadn't done a lot to sort of have that discourse, but that was one of the real surprising aspects of that work starting out.
Yeah, I get that a lot too. The Toronto Star has started for the year 2014 a Big Ideas series, and so they invited me to submit a big idea. So my big idea was, wouldn't it be great if the city of Toronto became a living wage employer? And they said, well, then how much would that cost? And the last time that we calculated a living wage for Toronto for two parents with two kids, and that was in 2008, that it would cost $16.60 an hour. That's how much each parent would have to make a living wage. And then they had me go on a live chat, and they were promoting the live chat, and they started promoting it as Trish Hennessy is advocating that Ontario's minimum wage should be $16.60. And I'm like, oh boy, okay, so let's talk about the difference, because I think that if we're promoting the living wage, we all have to be ready to talk about what the difference is.
Yes.
Do you have an elevator one? An elevator speech?
The minimum wage is the legislated floor. It's mandatory, so all employers would be bound to pay that, whereas the living wage is it's a rate that's calculated, and that calculation varies by community, cost of living, and size, and things like that. And it's a voluntary type of endeavor, I would say. So that's kind of how I think of the difference and communicate it publicly.
Yeah, that's close to what I do too. I talk about how the minimum wage is the legislative bare minimum. It's the least that we ask employers to pay in a province, and it's legislated. That's what they have to legally do. But the living wage to me is very interesting. It kind of changes and expands the conversation, because this isn't just what's the absolute bare minimum that we're requiring employers to pay. We're starting from the starting point. what is it like for someone living on a minimum wage to actually get by? What does it take to be able to pay for transportation to and from work, to be able to pay for childcare, to be able to pay for rent, and to be able to make sure that you've got food in your cupboard at the end of the month, and that you're not, as the woman so eloquently said, crying over spilled Kraft dinner. And I think that that actually changes the conversation and changes the frame, because that minimum wage conversation, when it just starts with what's the bare minimum we're asking businesses to pay, the answer for businesses is that's too much and we're going to go belly up. Living wage starts from a very different standpoint.
And I think you see that reflected in the level of nuance that actually is happening in communities where they're talking about a living wage. And that really struck me, that contrast of there's a lot of really good dialogue about health and productivity and well-being and all the things on that side of the equation that very conscientious employers recognize and do when they pay a living wage. That contrast to the experience of the minimum wage advisory panel, which started from a blank slate, in my opinion, where it was very much that those polarized, very caricature-like, depictions of minimum wage as a job killer, period, full stop. And there wasn't even a discussion or even much of that dialogue about anything on the any potential benefits on the employer's side. And that was the part that was really staggering, is that knowing what the literature says and what the research says on all of the ways that employers can adapt and adjust to changes in the minimum wage even, and what some of the positive experiences have been, but none of that really comes out. So I think that's where I really see the benefit of these living wage campaigns, is to bring a lot of that nuance and have those conversations. And often my observation has been that they are very gradual, and they build, and like what we heard this morning, they're really about mobilizing and building coalitions and bringing in the unusual suspects. And so that's the power versus sort of that really tired debate. I think that isn't even evidence-based.
That's right. In fact, you were on the panel, you had to make decisions. Were you not surprised by the actual lack of tracking in terms of how many businesses this does ostensibly kill? The Canadian data is very, very thin here.
It's extremely thin, and that was I sounded like a broken record, I'm sure, to every Chamber of Commerce presentation that came forward saying, in vague terms, this is bad, and often using small businesses as sort of a cover, right? And never talking about large corporations, which is extremely problematic considering that the majority of minimum wage earners are working for large corporations. So that was a problem for sure. But absolutely, I think I lost my train of thought. That's what I think.
Well, I think the minimum wage is a perfect, and the living wage, they're perfect complements to each other. I don't think they're either or. They're a means to have, one reflects the other. The inadequacy of the minimum wage starts to shine through the minute we're talking about what a living wage takes and what goes into it. And the fact that the living wage is calculated for a community, a given community, under reflecting local circumstances, means that it truly can spark a community conversation. To me, this isn't the kind of must raise, the wages kind of campaign, although sometimes that kind of campaign is absolutely necessary. I think that it was necessary just to try to get a bit of a minimum wage hike. But that community conversation around the living wage and the role that having a diverse group of people around the table can play, and having employers who are willing to stand up. And here, in Waterloo, with the credit union willing to become not only a living wage employer, but also an advocate for that, I think those are game changers locally. I think that this is how we start to change the conversation. And it's why that where the number fits in is part of the conversation, but it's not the beginning.
Yeah, I agree. And I think it was really evident, and just to kind of think of the power of some of these advocacy initiatives and campaigns, there's no question that the campaign to raise the wage to $14 had immense impact. It shaped the discourse. I mean, it had the business communities really, really on their heels from the get-go, so that even the submissions were framed as, here's why we cannot see a drastic hike. So already they were, I think they had won in a sense of already. There was the expectation that we know there's going to be some increase or some movement here. So yeah, I think it's important to recognize those differences between, some campaigns that have a very clear focus. And I think it did a lot to even to raise the issue of a living wage, right? Because the $14 figure was, I think, supposed to be emblematic of a living wage, even though we all know that that's not going to be a living wage in a lot of communities, a lot of larger communities. But that was sort of the symbolic, what I took from it was that they actually helped in choosing that figure to start having that conversation about, well, why can't a minimum wage be a living wage? Or why should somebody who's working full-time, full year at minimum wage be living below the poverty line? Why do we accept that? And then that led into actually really useful discussion too about whose role is it to ensure that people working full-time, full year aren't living in poverty, because even a lot of businesses would acknowledge, we realize they have to address poverty, that governments have to do that, but very clearly they were saying governments have to do that. So however you do that, through the tax system or through benefits, or they even would talk about social system. Yeah, but it was a clear sort of distinction that businesses' role is not to ensure that the people we employ, are meeting that threshold.
Yeah, and I don't think the conversation is over in Ontario on this one. I think it's only just begun. I do think that $14 minimum wage campaign unleashed a certain set of expectations, a certain kind of energy out there that doesn't end with an $11 minimum wage that's tied to the CPI, although a lot of organizations have recognized that tying it to the cost of living is a step forward. It's still not a living wage. It's still not enough to get you above the low income measure. And so that's where I think that continuing conversation about what an adequate minimum wage should be and what factors determine it are complementary to living wage conversations. Because the more we have local living wage conversations, the less the deciding factor will be what are businesses willing to do, and the less polarizing the discussion potentially could be.
And I think it would have been useful, and I'm in retrospect now thinking, we didn't hear one business come forward during that whole consultation session actually saying, here, we pay above a current minimum wage, or we pay a living wage, and here's why. But I think it could have added a lot too, to sort of that perspective, just recognizing, because clearly there's a lot of evidence to support that idea, that what a lot of us are advocating for, what they sort of refer to in the literature as the adjustment channels, and you're more well versed in this, but when we're hearing these arguments about, well, I'm just going to have to cut jobs or reduce hours, or it's going to cause a spike in youth unemployment, then nobody was really talking about the benefits, the increased productivity, reduced turnover, things like that. So I think it's really all very complementary. I agree. Although personally, I can also say when I was appointed to the panel, initially I thought, oh shit, like we can't launch a living wage campaign now, right? So I realized that there were some major tensions, right? Because in my mind, I was thinking, okay, there's already confusion about what these initiatives are and trying to do, and then I kind of perceived that there were a lot of businesses who were on high alert now with this whole panel. So I thought, we have to be careful about how we introduce it. So that was really something I kind of took away too, thinking that for communities where they've already launched a living wage campaign, I would imagine that, and I've had conversations with a couple of people on this, like that would be perhaps a difficult conversation for some of those employers, particularly if they had taken great steps to move up to a wage, let's say $14 or thereabouts as a living wage, and then to hear that the prospect of a minimum wage getting to that level, right? Because that was a big concern we heard from a lot of employers, was that it's not just the fact that we're going to have to pay, the minimum wage workers more. It's then what's that going to do for some of the lower wage workers? And then the advocates are saying, well, yeah, that's the point. It's supposed to be, it's wage-led growth. Like, this is how we're going to boost our economy. This is how we're going to recover from this recession.
Yeah. One thing that I was a little disappointed in terms of how the discussion unfolded in Ontario is it stopped short at does the minimum wage, is it a tool for reducing poverty? And so, the right-wing lobby says, oh, it's a one instrument. It doesn't, very few people actually who earn the minimum wage are in poor households. And I felt that kind of truncated the kind of discussion that we could have been having. And this is where I like looking at poverty through the lens of income inequality and looking at what's been happening to the bottom 40% of families in Ontario. Because when you look at the bottom 40%, the market over the past generation has been pummeling families in bottom 40%. The market is not delivering to the working poor, to the lower middle class even. And so what do you have to do? You have to start looking at what's the expectation, what's the social and cultural expectation of employers moving forward. Because if we keep doing what we have been doing, then we will erode that lower middle class. We will grow poverty and working poverty. And it's like this slow-moving train. We can see it coming, and there are a multitude of tools at our disposal, but the minimum wage is actually effective in that.
Yes, and that was extremely frustrating, I have to say, and I'm not telling tales I mean, I expressed it during the panel process. I felt that the debate was framed initially in terms that were not even accurate or fair, because it was really the straw person argument all along was minimum wage can't solve poverty. And all of you people who are asking for an increase are saying that the minimum wage can solve poverty, but because it can't solve poverty, we shouldn't even talk about it as a poverty reduction tool. And I was saying, does anybody not remember that actually the reason we're even having this panel is because, this was a promise from 2011 or something, to strike a panel, and that was after the McGuinty government had agreed to increase the minimum wage, I think, to $11. So it was like kind of a weird experience, a Twilight Zone type of experience, where I was thinking, this is very much like, I'm involved in this poverty reduction kind of context, and I understand that nobody talks about the minimum wage as a way we're going to solve poverty. No, but we have to talk about it as a measure, especially to address working poverty, and we can also talk about it as a way to address issues around the depth of poverty. But all of those nuances get lost, right? And even thinking of the interactions between some different policies like social assistance, and the fact that the Lincoln Sheik report is saying, a lot of communities are saying, let's increase social assistance rates by $100, but if you have a minimum wage that is too low, then there's no incentive, right? So there are all these complexities that I think really have to be brought to light. But it was a lot of work to even get that to be considered as relevant, and I think that was really unfair and unfortunate that the $14 campaign was really viewed as not being relevant to the mandate of the panel, which was just mind-boggling to me, considering that in the consultation paper they talked about, do you want to look at the low-income cutoff as a potential benchmark? So I think that was unfortunate, and we can, but hopefully, the campaign lives on, and I think it's made important inroads.
And that's why I think the next generation of the discussion is to really tuck into the discussion about the role of minimum wage and living wage in terms of from the employer perspective. And that conversation in the US is shifting way more rapidly than the conversation we're having here about it. In the US, you're getting like 150 economists say you could raise the minimum wage in the US by a considerable amount, and still it wouldn't hurt businesses. And for a very simple reason. If all the small businesses on your local Main Street are suddenly paying $14 an hour, that's a level playing field. It's not like some people are going to go to business for that one. In fact, it's more the McDonald's out there that are trying to drive this fear. But I think that business conversation is the next one to tackle. There's lots to be learned from how they're doing it in the US.
So I just have a question to Adam. Who controlled the deliberations? Was it the ministry? Was it the appointed chair? But who controlled it so that some of you weren't able to leverage the conversation, it changed the conversation, and suppositions, clearly they were suppositions based in old things, not new evidence, and power and control.
Well, I think the panel was structured from the get-go to give the chair had basically all the authority, so it was never, the final report was not the panel's final report, it was the chair's report, and that was always clearly communicated. And even throughout, I mean, the chair was, as he made clear in the report, I think, he felt very clear expectations from the government of what his parameters were and what he could or could not do. So he would say, you know, I'm not going to be an activist chair, and sort of, you know, I laud your activism and anti-pop. Like, it wasn't that these issues aren't being aired, and it wasn't that they weren't being brought forward, which was very frustrating as well, because you look at the breadth of the submissions and who was submitting. It wasn't, I mean, yes, the Workers' Action Center and that coalition was part of a campaign, but you look at the other groups that had adopted it, and we're talking about that. You're talking about Canadian Mental Health, United Ways, even people in the food bank business who aren't always, you know, always very progressive and thinking all the time, right? Who are coming forward and saying, no, like, this is not acceptable. And so that we were hearing about social determinants of health, and these were some of the things I thought, you know, really needed to be featured more prominently when we're talking about this era of austerity, which I think that was also the subtext was, well, the government's going to expect some moderation considering the climate of austerity. So then, you know, I thought then we should have a conversation about, well, what is the cost of poverty, and how can we start to redress some of these issues? But I think it was set up not so much to be I mean, it was called a consensus report ultimately, but I think what that meant was the chair interpreted consensus as he was only going to report on recommendations where he could get all the panel members to agree. So everything else was, you know, he didn't think was worthy of making a recommendation.
Are there other questions for Nur?
I have a comment and a question, and the comment, I'm afraid to say it in this room, but wasn't it Henry Ford who said, if my employees can't buy my car, then, you know, isn't that an approach? Ford. Earlier, somebody mentioned the United Nations tasking Canada with setting its minimum wage at the living wage. Can you expand a little bit on that, or?
You do it. You made it was great. Yeah.
Just is it the living wage that we're talking about, or?
Yeah, so the UN is never that specific when it's reviewing a country, because they don't want to be seen as meddling in what are sovereign affairs and issues, and so they are a bit hands off. But they said, and the standard isn't only applied to Canada, it would be applied to every developed wealthy nation. It is, I think, the UN's position that it's particularly applicable in a nation as wealthy as Canada. And I would think, given how we have technically fared in this recession, it would still be applicable. But they don't say, and the living wage shall be calculated like CCPA has said that it should be calculated. But we have, you know, leading examples of how it's calculated. So it's up to us as advocates to determine what that means. I should say, and I was actually going to put my hand up for the SAFE team, so if you don't mind, and I'll return the floor to you. When the UN makes a comment like that and says, you know, Canada, you could be doing much better, and in fact, your minimum wage is way too low, and it needs to be set over. They don't mean you need to do that right now. You've got to implement the living wage tomorrow, and it's got to be $15, right? There's a concept of progressive implementation. And so we could regard what Yasser Naqvi did with the raise and the linking of the minimum wage to the CPI as a progressive step. But it would be up to us to say that's only one progressive step. And in fact, it wasn't actually that progressive, because of course it just made minimum wage what it should be in light of inflation. So in any event, what but it's also something that we should bear in mind, and I think those of you who are engaged in living wage campaigns must deal with this with employers all the time. Like, that you could do it incrementally, I assume that's one of the options that are given to employers, and the same would be for government setting minimum wage. So I would never lobby Astronacty personally, actually, and say the minimum wage should be $14 an hour, because I think he would never go for that. Like, that's a sort of strategic thing, and I don't have a basis in international human rights law to argue for that. I do have an argument to say, great, so you put a 5-year review, I'd say it should be or whatever, is it one-year review, 5-year review for minimum wage?
In 5 years' time.
5 years, so that's too long, right? Even if it's gonna be indexed, I think it should be reviewed every 2 years at least, and it's gotta be raised every 2 years, is what I would argue, and that would be in keeping with international human rights law and our obligations.
In the UK, they actually review, they have a Fair Pay Commission, and they report every single year. So they make sure that they have a conversation about what people are earning in the marketplace every single year. Why can't we do that?
Dan, and then Greg.
I have 15 questions. When we think about depth and durability of change, we always talk about legislation. When we think about the distinction between minimum wage and living wage in relation to that same thought of depth and durability of change, we have to go back to the legislation questions for a number of things. Would we suggest that the minimum wage should be legislated at what we would calculate the lowest living wage in the community of that province? Question 1. Question 2, if wages and living wage, we want to be able to legislate them so that they're effective, but we can't do that appropriately at the provincial level, should our policy ask not be around province legislating that cities mandate living wage?
Okay, you want me to go? I think I can actually do this one. So the CCPA Ontario, our submission to the Ontario Minimum Wage Panel, we actually took a different tack. We said, what if the minimum wage was set to within 60% of the average industrial wage? Because then it's about setting the minimum wage where the lowest paid worker in the market is relative to the average. And we thought in a world where we're looking for solutions to income inequality, that was a really good place to start. And we actually suggested incremental increases in 75-cent raises. And that once we got to that, and it would have been by summer 2016, you add CPI, and we would have been within 60%. And that number for many communities would have been within the range of a living wage. So I think maybe it's time to ask ourselves the question about what's the real target for the minimum wage, especially if other provinces are going to enter into similar campaigns. Now, the living wage, no province has to mandate cities to pay living wages. Cities can just decide to.
Sure, they don't.
Well,
I don't want to interrupt, but if we want this stuff to last a long time, then somebody's got to mandate something. You can't say cities can choose to do it, and so we shouldn't pay for that.
So if you think that could happen in your province, go for it.
Well, I don't.
I think this is the more likely scenario. You know, you had the community of New Westminster, BC. They decided to become a living wage employer. The city of Hamilton has directed its staff to take a look at what that could do, what that would look like in their community, how they would utilize their fair wage policy. See, at least in Ontario, many communities actually have fair wage policies already in play. The City of Toronto is looking at this at a similar tool. So you wouldn't even have to legislate it. It's like the tool is there, but maybe you just update or modernize your fair wage policy to make sure that when your city is outsourcing outsourcing its work for cleaning or what have you, that then the contractual obligation with employers is that they pay the local living wage. So I actually think we can have it all, and it doesn't necessarily require provinces bullying municipalities into doing it. And when you look at the history of most major public programs and social justice advances in Canada is starting one community at a time. And you know, within a few years, suddenly it becomes the norm. People look from their communities to other communities for ideas for change. So I think, you know, certainly in Ontario, if you had Hamilton and Toronto adopt this through their living fair wage policies, I think it would change the standard throughout Ontario. You wouldn't actually need senior level of government telling you what to do. So I think that could be very cool.
Well, we've got to think there. No, but really, I was just going to have a little bit of a reflection. And one of the things that struck me in Ontario with the minimum wage campaign that found really impressive, even though, you know, as you said, the final result and the way the commission, or the whatever it's called, you call it commission, advisory committee, was structured. I mean, it left something to be desired. But what struck me is it engaged the province in a big conversation, and it engaged a lot of people. It wasn't just the anti-poverty movement, it wasn't just the labor movement. Have the Ontario Chamber of Commerce come out and at least take a position to say that the minimum wage should at least be indexed. I almost fell off my chair when I read that. Coming from any Chamber of Commerce. But one of my hopes is, like in Ontario, a bunch of us obviously are here today in different communities. Over lunch, we started talking a little bit about work together. I think the living wage gives us an opportunity to carry that conversation on and even a little bit further. And it's all the steps and those tools, you know, we talked about that this morning, about rebuilding the labor market, to reverse what we talked about, Trish, about how the bottom 40% are working more and earning less, or just treading water compared to a generation ago. It's all part, it strikes me, it's all part of an ongoing effort to gauge our communities and talk about. Well, I love the way somebody expressed it this morning, like, what do we really want for our community? What kind of community do we want? These are tools to have those kind of conversations.
Yeah. And that really came through, Greg, like, you know, having the fortune to actually meet with so many people and hear from so many people across Ontario. I mean, you really got the sense that inequality really is the defining issue of our time, as Obama says, right? I mean, but you could.
We said it in 2006, Canadian Centre for Policy Alternatives.
CCPA, I stand corrected.
We said it first.
Yeah, he stole it. Okay, so.
Sorry, I was going to say, one of the things that we encountered in Waterloo Region back in 2009 when we started working on this is that we had a regional councillor who started saying, oh, well, you know, the region can't, you know, he put out this notion that got picked up in local media that if the region picked a living wage, that what it was doing was picking the minimum wage for Waterloo Region. That was really confusing and really hard to do with. That's why I was so excited when we were able to look to Calgary, what you guys have done in BC. It's like, there's another way we can go about this. And enlisting first employers that are interested in letting it get on this, and hopefully maybe rebuild our efforts, taking a slightly different turn. Run for gas. We have somebody on our steering who is running.
I just want to say too, to acknowledge the work of the CCPA, and I mean, really the other really impressive thing was all the data that was coming forward, right? Really meaningful, rich data. Unfortunately, wasn't always valued, but I mean, those positions, like actually talking about an average industrial wage and being able to start, you know, really talking about the hourglass economy and the fact that it's not just all students who are living with their, you know, well-to-do parents. On like, really things have changed, and thanks to a lot of like the Sheila Block piece as well, to talk about some of the populations who are disproportionately affected, right, by low wage work. All of that really came through loud and clear, I think, and it's building. I think it seems to be building momentum.
Commissioner, I'd be interested in your research. I've been reading some stuff about some of the licensed employers who use kind of, you were interested in comparing to other industrial wage. With these companies, what they've done is they said the top 1% will never make more than so many times the lowest paid. And I thought that's an interesting, and these companies are doing very well. By the way, they're not going to they're doing extremely well financially and good returns. they've established, so as the top 1% of the company goes up, we see it really the rest of the things. I think I started hitting from 19 times, 9 times. Yeah. And these companies are off very well.
You make a great point because that's part of this low wage economy is rewarding some employers who are actually they're in it just for their shareholders. It's corporate profits and that's about it. And it's eclipsing the fact that there are actually employers out there who are adopting corporate social responsibility measures and who are actually becoming living wage employers. They just might not even know it and are adopting ratios. There's also a new venture called WageMark. You can look at it at wagemark.org, and Peter McLeod is heading that up. And basically, WageMark is a place where employers, if they pay a ratio of 8 to 1, the highest paid employer to the lowest, then you can become a certified WageMark employee. We at the Canadian Centre for Policy Alternatives signed up for it, and I'm pleased to say we're a 3 to 1 ratio.
I was at the Social Enterprise World Forum that was held in Calgary last year, and all through that forum, I was just I was musing to myself, and I mused it on Twitter, so it actually was more than myself. Just this intersection between all this kind of impact investing, social enterprise that seems to be emerging across all these provinces, and how we haven't actually made the intersection between are those enterprises, living wage, and how could they be and should they be, and what is that kind of intersection, and I don't know, I don't know. I think it's another part of the conversation, but that has to be part of that conversation as well. And so, I always think about people that are systems navigators, and who are the systems navigators that can get into that kind of impact investing social enterprise conversation to talk about that intersection, because I think that that's another, just as we heard about credit unions and the cooperative movement, I think there are some leading early wins that we or kind of low-hanging fruit that we might be able to go after. One of my dreams has always been the top 100 companies in Canada. Can we get them to, as part of everything that they have to submit about their company, also submit, the fact that they're living wage employers, right? Because there's a whole bunch of other criteria that they have to go through. So, are there things like that as a movement we can start to push for those kinds of things?
On your point about social enterprise, actually, it's interesting. David LePage, who's one of the gurus of social enterprise, he came to our community a few years ago, and I'd asked him about, well, how many of these social enterprises, in your experience, are able to pay a living wage? He said, not really. That's really hard. I mean, they're already trying to compete, as it is. And then he was just in town like a few weeks ago, and I asked him the same question, and it actually had changed. Like he was suggesting that now that's very much more a part of that discussion, and they're factoring that into their social costs up front. And he said, no, my answer sort of changed. So I think that is another sign, perhaps, that a lot of this advancement on inequality and is actually having an effect. And on your other point about some other ways of engaging employers, I was thinking of we have a big push on workplace wellness in our community, a big awards recognition program. And I was thinking, when I was attending one last week, a lot of the arguments that the employers were using for why that they've adopted it were the same ones for living wage. So I think I always see health as a really important entry point into that conversation too in communities.
A year and a half ago, sorry, Donna Jean, you part of that? Okay. A year and a half ago, we were commissioned a report on someone who's an expert in corporate social responsibility. And in that report, he referenced a survey that went to human resource managers in Canada. And the majority of them in the survey indicated that when they think about what level to set the lowest paid worker in their corporation would be, that their standard is whatever the minimum wage is. many of them didn't even know what a living wage is. So back to this point about sometimes all we have to do is put it on the table and start conversations. And human resource managers may start actually looking at this different. Sometimes I just think we just haven't had a conversation. So over to this room to change the conversation.
I think that's very strange that a lot of people, maybe even myself included, thought people should be able to live on two families. You know,
Yeah.
And I sort of think it is fundamental. That's what a lot of people think, and including human resources. So it's a really bad thing.
Exactly.
Yeah, we can change that.
Yeah.
So we could probably keep this conversation going for the rest of the afternoon, but I think for an impromptu, let's throw this together, winging it, I think that was really good. So thank you, Trish, for staying.
Thanks a lot. It's like therapy for me to get this off the road.
So we want to do one last thing, and then we'll take a break, and we're going to reorganize. Natasha has been working on this research project with a group of students from Carlton University around best practices in the living wage. And so if you want to take a few minutes just to share some of your findings, they're finished and are in the process of doing presentations at various conferences about it. Yeah, if you want to come up to the front. So the reason that Natasha and a group of Carlton students has been involved in this is because we're involved with a SSHRC-funded grant with the Suffice project. Community's First Impacts of Community Engagement is a 7-year research project. And some communities in the room, Tom included, and St. John there next door, and the Waterloo region are involved in doing that. And one of the projects of the Poverty Hub has been this research around living wage best practices.
So thank you for letting me share all of this with you guys. Just to start off, I'm not a great presenter to big groups of people, so if I stumble all over everything and I don't elaborate, just ask me afterwards. I'm quite happy to talk about this with you. It's been an amazing day. I'd like to say, first of all, a lot of what we found, so we've been looking at the living wage across Canada for the past 6 months. And actually, this day has kind of validated everything that we found. So this is going to kind of be a summary for you guys of what today's been. So we were asked to look at the living wage and see what the campaigns look like across Canada. So we sent out a survey to all of our to living wage advocates in Canada, and we did interviews. So our surveys, we got 10 back. It's not a big sample, so we didn't really feel like we could come up with best practices to implement the living wage per se, but what I have for you is kind of an overview and some helpful tips in the path that you guys are taking. So our survey, we had 10 responses. They were all from Ontario and British Columbia, so this is kind of the two provinces. They served a range between 3 million people to 8,000 people within their region. We had people with experience from half a year to 15 years. Most people said that they worked with 1 to 16 advocates, so kind of a core group of people, and 2 to 8 core organizations within them. One person identified, rather than how many advocates did they had a complete community process, which we thought was interesting. And 80% of our sample reported following the national living wage calculation from the Canadian Centre of Policy Alternatives. There was one response that was kind of interesting, that they had calculated a variety of scenarios. So not only a family of 4, but also a family of 3, a single parent and a single person with no children, and then including a small savings cushion for each of them. Where we found the calculation varied in some places was providing for cell phone and monthly payments, a savings cushion, eye care, dental care, and entertainment. As well, there was no consensus. We asked whether advocates thought there should be more factors included in the living wage calculation. There was no consensus over whether they thought that or not, but some of the things that came up would be education savings being included, retirement and savings included, and childcare or loan repayments included. Some of the points of interest for survey data when looking at how you approach businesses, the presentations, experience, and that kind of stuff. So most people, out of 10, again, said that they were looking at municipal governments and community organizations. That was by far the two main populations, followed by small to medium businesses. The method to the first approach was usually personal contacts. So 6 out of 10 people said that was the main approach, and generally the first point of contact was management in comparison to, say, HR or volunteers or frontline staff. The messages we asked, the most productive audience setting we found was small meetings or presentations rather than one-on-one meetings or large presentations. The data presented to employers most often were the benefits to society and benefits to workers. And that was followed by benefits to the company and then case studies from the living wage in other regions. There was a lack of consensus on what data was most influential, but what came up was benefits to the company, economic problems in society, and benefits to society. The main data sources was by far Stats Canada, or government data, so Stats Canada, Health Canada, that kind of thing, which we thought brings that, like, what are the implications for the future now that the long survey data, I think that's what it is done. So where are we going to look next? The next two were socially progressive think tanks and organizational data as main data sources. The most useful information people asked that they said they would like to have were the realized standards of living for employees before and after the living wage, realized standards of living for communities before and after the living wage, and material benefits to workers in society. And then employer experience. So the most common characteristics for businesses or companies moving forward with the living wage is first being a nonprofit organization, and second, having a sympathetic employer. When speaking from experience, people thought the main reason for business implementing a living wage was to have a sympathetic employer, just personal characteristics of the employer, and their improved ability to recruit and retain employees. People said their counter arguments when we asked, sometimes employers aren't very forthcoming with this, they think it'll shock the market. Most counter arguments were to reference successful case studies. And the biggest allies in the community overwhelmingly were other advocacy groups and other living wage campaigns in other communities. So from this and from our interviews, I'm putting the interviews and our bigger themes in the recommendations because it's kind of repetitive. So number 1, to develop a group of core individuals and organizations with diverse skills and contacts. So again, we found that a core group of 1 to 16 people was common, and it was often considered by our interviewees as their main strength. So having dedicated people with real conviction that this is something that will benefit the community. And that those individuals also bring their organizations that they're associated with can become the core foundation of then where you go into the community further. Diversity was seen as a really big asset to be able to bring a new voice to a lot of like-minded people. So somebody said that, a lot of times we get into a room and we talk to people who think like us. And it's really easy to convince each other, but then to draw in those different voices to be able to expand your language. And personal contacts, again, it wasn't just our surveys who said that personal contacts are really important. It was our interviewees who also said that a lot of the time that's how they get a foot in the door. The next recommendation was to find a champion, as was said earlier, to expand the buy-in within that sector. So 1 to 2 strong champions in the community to be able to convince others and motivate them to be able to speak that language, because business doesn't always speak the same language as the community or the nonprofit sector. One of our interviewees recommended start by looking at small businesses who are already CSR minded. Another one recommended starting with employers who are already close to implementing the living wage and who are already progressively minded. I think that was echoed earlier too. And then finally, that buy-in was really important, that having these champions to really convince employers that it's important and not just attacking them or shaming them into doing this kind of thing. The next recommendation was to have a positive framework. So through the trends in our survey and from the people we interviewed, we found that a very positive message focused on successful case studies, realized standards of living and material benefits to workers, benefits to society, benefits to companies was a really big theme. And to approach businesses not as a barrier, but maybe like harder to penetrate, but just keeping that positive framework. The next recommendation was the use of media to facilitate community conversation. So getting that awareness piece out there, having people continually talk about it in their communities helps to spread that word. Especially using media was talked about, media exposure, especially at the beginning of your campaign. So maybe when you first release the living wage figure, something like that. Somebody talked about doing interviews and sharing stories from people who live below the living wage and then people who live above the living wage. There was also, the next theme, like Deborah said, was to generate commonality and collectivity. So all of our interviewees talked about having a multi-sector approach. So you have government, you have businesses, you have community all there. So you have to find that common goal, something that everyone can agree on to then work towards putting it through. There was a little concern over differing ethics or differing values between maybe the business's bottom line and what communities are pushing for, but somebody said if there was one goal put on the table that people within that region could work towards it, using allies. And that employers and the community need to understand each other through each other's lenses. So if you think like the employer through their lens, they also have to think what it's like to be in poverty and how hard that is. The next recommendation was to use more resources for research, especially case studies, because what we found was there are a lot of people who really wanted that knowledge, that's one of the main things that our advocates were lacking in, successful case studies, and to be able to quantify that for businesses. Obviously, that was also time and financial resources were also a big barrier that came out of this, but maybe using the resources that you do have could further it along. The Canadian Centre for Policy Alternatives and Vibrant Communities were both mentioned as really great places to start for background materials, technical information, that kind of thing. And then finally, something that we struggled with a little bit was what is better an appeal to emotion or knowledge. From our survey, 7 out of 10 said that appeal to knowledge showed better results in general, but I would say 4 out of 4 of our interviewees took a very values-based approach. That might be something to talk about after, and that concludes that portion of it. Thank you for listening.
So Tom has twisted my arm, and which one, Tom? The mission services one?
It's the 720. So this.
Oh.
I know. I'm a video guy. So this is the last video of the day, I promise. On the weekend, we along with recording Isabella, we also talked to a couple of new living wage employers in Hamilton. So this is Dan Peace, the chair of Mission Services. He's also a small business owner himself, as well as on this video, Carol Callan, who's executive director of Mission Services in Hamilton. So this video is going to be part of a larger video we're in the process of developing right now that will speak specifically to employers about living wage. So we're hoping to get some private sector employers as well, and a few others in Hamilton, and really use that as a tool to shop out to others who may be interested in becoming a living wage employer. So we'll share that once it's complete.
Great. Thanks, Tom. We're going to take a 10-minute break. And when we come back, then really it's time to turn the conversation to what's next and how do we work together to get there. So we're going to have some roundtable conversations to end our day. So we'll take 10 minutes. There is a snack over there and coffee and.
Yeah.
No.
Coming into it's on even though we had discussions about the cost of
It's not on there.
It's on the side bar. One of the Yeah.
Actually,
No, they're right there.
I'll be back tomorrow. What?
Okay, so we can get out of this Ustream now, right? I wonder how many people.
There were 8 people watching the last bit.
That's good. That's very good.
It said 8 out of 44 views. So I wonder if we had 44 throughout the day. This is annoying.
Turn them off. I don't know how to turn that projector off.
I think it just.
Okay, I have to go to the bathroom.
Chocolate coffee.
Take it over there.
Do you want me to get No, I can. Great minds think alike.
Does this thing turn off? I think we just unplug it. So glad that we're done. I'm gonna steal Tom's videos. Yeah, I'd like to post them. So we're keeping this?
Yep. You need snow tires to get back to our town. We're finding
I
out it's
hear
snowing.
it's gonna be. It's snowing? Safe drive. Yeah. Has he posted those today? No, he just did them on Saturday. Are you kidding? What? I don't know what I did. It's in my backpack from back to back. It's a busy day. Yeah, we're gonna do that now too to kind of further the conversation. Yeah.